Hi guys, good afternoon everyone.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Welcome, thank you for coming to the STEM Club rocket building and rocket launching event. This activity was done last year and we did have a very strong feedback from the students, and just want to let you know that you, I think there are 9 or 10 of you, didn't count, are just going to be part of the building session. We will have many more people come in for the launch session as well. You have a treat that in terms of your instructor for the day is not me, kind of cool thing. Instructor for the day, I feel humble. Instructor for the day is Mr. Ed Pearson. He has been with the Rocket Launch Club. Rocket Club is a nationally acclaimed club for quite a few years. He has worked previously at the Goddard as well. So his experience is extensive, to say the least. He has worked with a lot of colleges out there. He does competition for Montgomery College, if I'm not mistaken. He's done competitions and events for the middle school level, at the high school level. So he's covered it all. And this is his repeat visit, so we do want to thank him again for coming.
Thank you. Thank you.
Mr. Pearson is going to talk about safety protocols here. You all will have to sign a waiver. The first line of the waiver is, anybody remember? I acknowledge that I can die. Sorry, I didn't say that. But you're going to sign a waiver because we are videotaping you and we are going to be taking pictures, which predominantly will stay within the YouTube realm or the STEM Club webpage, but nothing other than that. So we won't Facebook each other out. Mr. Pearson is going to talk about safety protocols. Please make sure that you adhere to those rules. We will then at some point we'll walk together out into the fields and then we will launch them. Hopefully he will have some other ones as well to launch, especially I'm curious about the egg. If not, I'm going to boil the egg this time around. See if that works out. Without further ado, because we want to be on time, at any point if you need to take a break to bathroom or something, please let Mr. Pearson know, you can do so. But we would like to walk as a group to the athletic field, and we have invited other people to attend that as well. Okay. With that, thank you. And Ms. Barnes is going to be his assistant, and I'm just going to be a watcher here today. Okay. Well, have fun and enjoy.
What I thought we could do is we're going to build rockets and then we're going to fly them. Thought beforehand we could talk a little bit about what makes the rockets work, because it seemed to me as we were driving out here, there are things we do every day where science impacts us, but it's so seamless that we're not even aware of it. Whether it's having to take a shower in the morning and have the curtain flow towards you due to a Bernoulli effect, or whether it's driving your car. You can drive a car without having to know, how the pistons work or anything like that. Whether you drop a pencil and you scoot your chair back to pick it up or all that. And then not only the common stuff, but then I'm watching TV now because I'm an old guy, and I'm seeing things that just is unbelievable for me, like people that are talking to the TV. Not that they're cussing out their team that lost or made a bad play, but they're giving the TV directions on what programs, or to pause, and doing it by audio signal. So I was hopeful that we could use something kind of exotic, building rockets, because that's not something we do normally every day, and see how the principles of the STEM, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics might impact it. Talk a little bit now about history of rocketry, talk about the principles that are involved, and then we'll start building the rockets, okay? Then after that, we'll go out in the field and we'll put together our launch rack and we'll fly the rockets. Rocketry has been around for a long time. Anybody have an idea how long? You guys probably studied this stuff. Was it the ancient Chinese? Was it Marco Polo? Who did this?
2,500 years.
Say again?
2,500 years, maybe.
I don't know. It's like the 1400s or so. And it was the Chinese. They wanted to protect their territory from Mongol hordes that were coming around, and so in the 14th century or 1300s, they put up rockets and such, and I guess it was about another 250 years somebody got the idea that they could go ahead and try to figure out the basic principles that made it work. It seems to me that rocketry although we have these great milestones in space, such as people walking on the moon or the Hubble Space Telescope or visiting the International Space Station, these carriers that we have typically were had for military purposes, such as keeping the Mongols from invading your land. 200 years ago, next year, we're going to be celebrating a bicentennial of what? The Fort McHenry and the Star-Spangled Banner and the bombs bursting in air. These were Congreve rockets that were developed in England and hopefully trying to keep the Americas back in the British fold. That's what their hope was. It didn't work out that way. When we sent our first satellites into space, the Sputnik, back in 1957, that was aboard a military rocket. Russia had suffered a terrible defeat during the Second World War of having all their aircraft destroyed. So after the Second World War, they had to get their aircraft industry back together. And they also sought other ways of going into space and deliver war systems by using what the Germans had developed in the Second World War with the V-2 and the A-4 type rockets. And so they adopted one of their what they called their R-7, put a satellite on top of it and sent it up into space on October the 4th, 1957. When we started sending our satellites up, our first satellite was what? Do you remember what that one was called? It was some kind of an Explorer for us. It was called Explorer 1, and it was launched on January the 31st, 1958. And it was on a Jupiter C rocket, which was a carrier that we were going to use for weapon systems. When we launched our first astronaut into space, that was Alan Shepard back in May 5th, 1961. That was aboard a Redstone, another rocket carrier. The next fellow that went up into space for the United States that went into orbit, our first orbiting astronaut, not Yuri Gagarin, he went up on a Soyuz spacecraft, also a military rocket. Ours was John Glenn. He went on an Atlas rocket, which was an Air Force mission to deliver weapon systems. Fortunately now, I mean, when we launch our rockets, they're more civilian and they give us these spectacular views of space from like the Hubble Space Telescope and going in. Led to a history of 35 years with the Space Shuttle, 135 missions with that. Early rocket pioneers were Dr. Robert Goddard, Konstantin Eduardovich Tsiolkovsky, he was a Russian, lived in Kaluga, Russia. And the third was a guy by the name of Herman Ober. He was born in Romania, but that part kind of became annexed to East Germany, so the Germans claim it. And those were the three rocket contemporaries. All three of them were influenced by, guess what? Jules Verne and H.G. Wells and science fiction. So fiction and what you see in the movies can inspire you to go on to greater things. Dr. Goddard was the first to make a rocket that worked using liquids for fuel, liquids having a higher specific impulse or kick in the can to allow the rocket to go up faster and higher and eventually leave the bounds of Earth. He published a tract in 1919 called A Method of Reaching Extreme Altitudes. Smithsonian paid for it and it was distributed. People thought that it was kind of interesting. He said that it was possible to go to the moon, maybe you could put some photographic flash powder on the rocket, have it flash on the moon, show you that it actually hit the moon. People said, well, no, I'm not sure that really worked because once you get above the atmosphere, there's no air to push against. If there's no air to push against, then the rocket won't work. It can't go all the way to the moon. It'll just go up to the atmosphere, and then when there's no air, then it'll fall back down. So someone needed to find the natural principles of mathematics and say that was not correct. You can go to the moon, as we obviously did 42 years ago. And that fellow that came up with the principles that guide all rocketry, whether it's Dr. Goddard's rocket or the Space Shuttle or the Saturn V that took our astronauts to the moon, was a guy by the name of, anybody you know, who had the principles of motion? It was Sir Isaac Newton. And he did this in 1657. And he came up with 3 laws of motion that I'm going to lay on you right now. And that will govern the rockets that you build today, just like the big rockets that NASA flies. And his first law of motion I call the couch potato motion. And that is someone that is sitting at a couch watching TV. will remain watching TV until a commercial comes or, something happens. Unfortunately, back in 1657, they didn't have TV. So all you could do is, sit around a tree and watch apples fall or something like that. And so his first law of motion he called the law of inertia. And it reads, if you in a text, that a body at rest will stay at rest. And a body at motion will stay in motion in a straight line, infinitely going on until it's acted upon by some exterior or external force. Okay? That was the first law of motion. Now, how he developed this is kind of interesting. You're going into school here, and every now and then we have interruptions of school. Apparently not holidays, because you're here on Columbus Day. All right? Well, he was taking about a 2-year sabbatical when he came up with this law of motion. He was at a relative's farm because they had a bad case of plague that was hitting the area. And so they said, all right, Cambridge, school's out for a couple of years until everything is cool, and then we can come back to school and continue our studies. So he was out at a relative's farm when he saw apples falling from a tree. This is the urban legend. I don't know if that's really what happened, if it bonked him on the head or he just observed it or what and he was trying to figure out what makes things work like that. And so he came up and then he printed it all out in a book, and his book was called Principia Mathematica de Naturalis, or Natural Principles of Mathematics, or Mathematical Principles of Nature. And he wrote it in Latin, although he was English, because everybody was writing things in Latin, left over from the Middle Ages. But the priests were writing down everything. All science was being written in Latin. So if you were Polish, like Copernicus, you could read Kepler's law of motions, well, if you were alive then, even though he was English. Or if you were Tycho Brahe and you were Swedish, you could read his work, because all in common was Latin. That was the lingua franca at that time. Just like if you go overseas today, English seems to be the common language that people will understand you with. All right, so that's what he wrote it down, and his first law of motion again was a body at rest will stay at rest, and a body at motion will stay in motion in a straight line and travel there infinitely. Okay, and that affects the rockets that we launched. Second law of motion that he had, which is a pretty cool one, he called the law of acceleration. And it reads something like this, that if you're going to have a body change its direction or change its motion, it's going to be proportional to the magnitude of the force that's being directed on it and in the direct direction that that force is going on. Okay, so they simplified that and made it in mathematical terms. And the equation that came out was force equals mass times acceleration. And that is the typical force that will operate on the rockets that we're going to build today. Third law of motion is the one you're probably most familiar with, which is every body's motion has an opposite direction impact, or for every action there's an opposite and equal reaction. That's a short way of saying it. And so we'll see that in play. I'm going to get a rocket out and show it to you. So we're going to demonstrate the first law of motion. I'm going to put it right by you, all right? All right, now watch this very carefully. What's that first law of motion? Please help me.
Keep at rest and sustain at rest.
Right, until it's acted upon. All right, so let's watch it. Tell me when something happens. Kick the table, something. All right, so that's it at rest. All right, things, well, we actually know it's not really at rest because